Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. That's right, even though I talked about the latest movie in the DC animated universe back in 2016, a year later, we got a return to the DCAU with Batman and Harley Quinn, directed by Sam Liu, written by Bruce Timm and James Krieg, produced by Alan Burnett and Matthew Mahoney, and starring Kevin Conroy, Melissa Roch, Paget Brewster, Lauren Lesser, and Kevin Michael Richardson. This movie features Batman and his old partner Nightwing chasing after Poison Ivy and her new partner, the Floronic Man, who want to turn the entire planet's population into plant people. Batman and Nightwing eventually team up with Harley Quinn, who knows Ivy well enough to help the dynamic duo stop her. Hilarity ensues, I guess. So, this movie. Oh boy. When this first came out, I heard a lot of people disparaging this film, but I was still holding out hope that it wouldn't be as bad as they all said it was. And believe me, I heard a lot of negativity leveled towards this movie when it came out. So while I didn't want this movie to be bad, I went in thinking there was a strong possibility that it would be. And it's not good, folks. Just quickly measuring this up to the other Batman movies in the DCAU, I would say this is the worst of the bunch. Even Mask of the Phantasm, which I have made no secret that I am not a big fan of, is light years ahead of this movie. Even Sub-Zero, which is basically an episode of the animated series stretched out so that it is barely a feature-length mess, is better than this movie. But talking about it like this, it makes it sound like this movie is aggressively bad, and it's not. I've seen worse movies. I've seen worse superhero movies. No, this movie isn't the worst thing that's ever graced your screen like some of the haters would have you believe. But then, what is it about this movie that makes it the worst of the Batman movies in the DCAU? Well, there's a lot of things about this movie that I don't think work very well at all. So I guess before I launch into a 20-minute diatribe about everything that I hate, I should quickly talk about the few things that I did not hate. In theory, I like the idea of returning to the DCAU. I was and remain a huge fan of this version of the DC universe, and I was a little crestfallen a little over 10 years ago when we continued to see animated projects featuring DC Comics superheroes, but none of them were a continuation of this universe that I had grown up with and had introduced me to so many of these characters. So I do appreciate that we're getting to return to this world, although the effectiveness of this return, well, I'll get to that later. I think the animation here is a step up from some of the DC animated movies that we've been getting lately. If you look at movies like Flashpoint Paradox or Throne of Atlantis, they look like the entire movie takes place in some kind of misty supernatural setting. So watching this is like those eyeglasses commercials where putting on your glasses suddenly clears up the fog and you can see color clearly again. I shouldn't have to say this, but it's nice being able to see what's on the screen. And in the same vein as the animation, I like the character designs here. I've always been a fan of the DCAU art style, largely blazed by Bruce Timm almost 30 years ago, but that's about where the nice things end for me. If you want to see the DCAU art style, I would recommend watching literally anything else in the DCAU or doing a Google search to see Bruce Timm's designs for Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. You'll be $8 richer if you pay as much as I did for this movie, and you probably won't spend an hour and change looking through the Google image search. So if those are the things that I liked about this movie, then what did I not like? Well, not to be overly dramatic, but everything else. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this movie has almost no redeeming aspects to it. I want to start by saying that Melissa Roch as Harley Quinn is a little distracting when I'm so used to Arlene Sorkin or Tara Strong. Yes, Ivy is now being voiced by Paget Brewster instead of Diane Pershing, but Brewster sounds a little more like Ivy does in her other DCAU appearances than Roch does for Harley's other voice actresses that we've heard. And I don't expect Sorkin or Strong to remain in this role forever, so don't misread what I'm saying. I don't even know if they could find someone who could match the vocal timbre those two actresses brought to the role. Maybe they couldn't. But I know that while Melissa Roch isn't horrible, I mean the material she's working on isn't good, but that's not her fault, she just does not sound like Harley to me. It's hard to put into words, but Roch has a deeper voice than what Strong and Sorkin did. It's not necessarily bad, especially if this was a brand new character, but when you have an actor reprising a role someone else made famous, you have to expect people will compare their work to their predecessor, which is what I'm doing here. I also want to talk about the tone of this movie, which is something that I usually don't discuss too much in these reviews. You see, Batman the Killing Joke came out in 2016, and as an audience member, that movie was very emotionally draining, so I can only imagine how bad it was for someone who worked on it. And I heard that after working on a movie with such heavy material and exhausting emotional wreckage, that Bruce Timm wanted something a little lighter and overall more fun. And so this movie was born. And you know, I don't mind the idea of doing a more lighthearted Batman story, or even a less broody Batman. I was probably the only person on the planet that didn't mind some of the quippy jokes that Batman had in the live-action Justice League movie. So doing something like that, or even something along the lines of the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams Batman of the 1970s, that would have been less devastating devastating than Killing Joke, and I wouldn't have minded that. So in theory, I got no problem with this. Bruce Timm was feeling down in the dumps after Killing Joke. He wants to do something fun and funny. I'm fine with that. But the problem is that this movie is not funny. Like, ever. Absolutely none of the jokes land. The things I do for Gotham. Wah, wah.
It's funny, I always kind of thought you and Batman didn't like girls.
Wah, wah. And sure, humor is subjective. I tried showing someone my favorite movie of all time, which happened to be a comedy, and they didn't find one thing about it the least bit funny. Even when I tried explaining to them what I thought was funny about the movie, they wouldn't budge. So sure, it's possible that some people thought that this movie worked on that level, but based on the reviews I'm seeing, it doesn't look like I'm alone. And we've already established that some of the folks who worked on this movie wanted something a little lighter than Killing Joke, and fair enough. But you look at almost any installment of the DCAU that this movie is returning to, and it is lighter than The Killing Joke, but doesn't sink to scatological humor like this movie does. Heck, the DCAU isn't really known for its humor most of the time. Sure, you have episodes like This Little Piggy, which is based on a humorous premise from the word go, and is very much treated as a comedy. But just as often, you had episodes like The Egg Baby, which has a humorous premise, but there are still stakes, and it isn't really trying and failing to make the audience laugh. But they can laugh, but it's still treated more or less like a serious episode. Heck, if they wanted to do something lighter than Killing Joke, they didn't even have to do a comedy. Look at some of the more serious episodes of the DCAU. Starcrossed, The Once and Future Thing. These episodes were not funny in the least, but they didn't involve torture or implied rape, so they automatically qualify as lighter than The Killing Joke. It just seems to me that the folks who made this were venturing into territory that they weren't very familiar with, and it shows in the final product. Something else that made me a little uneasy with this movie was putting Harley Quinn in front and center as one of the protagonists. Turning villains into heroes is nothing new in superhero stories, and I guess it was just a matter of time before it happened to Harley Quinn. And I know she's had a slightly more heroic time of it in the comics in recent years, if you ignore that one time she blew up tiny kids with video games, but I can't help but feel like someone in a corporate boardroom said, "Hey, Harley Quinn was received very well in the Suicide Squad movie last year, let's put her more front and center here." Now, for all I know, this did not happen. The two movies were about a year apart, and it probably takes longer than that from conception to birth to create one of these films. But they have done this kind of thing before. Mr. Freeze is going to be in Batman and Robin, so let's do an animated film with Mr. Freeze. Superman Returns is coming out in theaters, let's quickly churn out an animated Superman film that has Superman in it. So this is nothing new to them. So while I don't know that there was some kind of corporate motivation behind this, my gut tells me that there was. Not to mention, Harley's redemption in this movie rings incredibly false when we know that at some point later in this timeline, she will reunite with the Joker and torture Tim Drake, completely breaking his mind. Ha ha! That wacky Harley. Hey, remember that fun time where she kidnapped Bruce's adopted son and tortured him? Oh, fun times. I can't be the only one who has a hard time empathizing with this version of Harley when we know what's coming in her future, can I? Beyond the genre of the film just not working, or the choice of character used in this movie being incredibly puzzling to me, there's so much else that I just did not like. Like how this movie is set sometime during the events of Justice League Unlimited, but it has to find the most clumsy way possible to keep this from becoming a Justice League story. Nightwing and Batman know that the fate of the entire planet is at stake, and they decide they don't need any help from the Justice League in stopping the Floronic Man and Poison Ivy. Really? I get it, Batman doesn't know that Booster once saved the entire planet, so maybe he thinks that Booster is useless, but literally anyone would be better than nobody at all, right? This movie is trying to tell me that Batman would rather have Harley Quinn in his corner than any member of the Justice League that Booster names off. You can't tell me that Bloodwind and Booster Gold both couldn't at least be backup when you tried to stop 7 billion people from dying. And I get it, this is a Batman story, we don't want to lose our protagonist by bringing in other heroes, but then maybe this should have been set before the events of the Justice League series. Don't even do this scene with Batman calling for help, and you immediately put the stakes a little bit higher. Batman has nobody else who can help, because Barbara's in college and Tim is with the Titans, I guess. But if you set this movie when it is set, and you wonder why the Justice League can't help, it's a valid question, don't get me wrong, but the movie doesn't do a very good job of answering the why. Beyond trying to keep this a Batman adventure, I can't help but feel like this is also the movie trying that humor thing again and failing. Oh, Nightwing thinks that guy's a jerk, we can't bring him along, lol. And speaking of the movie trying to do the humor thing, we have Nightwing and Batman who suddenly become the biggest idiots in the DC animated universe that I would rather have Bloodwind and Booster here handling this crisis than these two clowns. Because it takes Harley Quinn telling these two dummies that a plant person might be weakened if you set him on fire.
He's just made of leaves, right? Anybody got a match?
Nightwing and Batman kiss the cheeks of the woman who will one day torture Tim Drake into insanity. Wah wah. But even if this movie was actually funny, I would have problems with how much time is spent on stuff that has nothing to do with the actual plot. And by actual plot, I mean the Poison Ivy and Floronic Man trying to destroy humanity stuff. We spend about a minute and a half on a cutesy little musical intro for the movie. Harley Quinn and Nightwing have a pointless fight, even though Harley insists that she is reformed, and then they sleep together in about one of the most forced and obtrusive sexy time scenes that I've ever seen in anything, all of which totaled up to about 5 minutes. We spend 2.5 minutes chasing down a guy who stood Harley up at her high school prom. We spend a full minute on fart jokes so that Harley can go use a gas station bathroom, and Dick can offer to pay Bruce money to leave her there, even though it was Dick who suggested that they bring her along in the first place. Get it? Batman is a billionaire, but Dick is offering to pay him money. Wah wah. We go to a supervillain bar where Harley knows a guy who can give them information, only to spend, I poo you not, another 5 minutes on Harley Quinn singing Hanging on the Telephone by the Nerves because the guy won't give them information unless she does. Then we waste 2.5 minutes bringing Swamp Thing into the movie, and he literally does nothing at all. He tells Floronic Man that this is not the way to right the wrongs done to Earth, but that he won't do anything to stop him either. Why even bring Swamp Thing in during the grand finale if he literally does nothing? Harley even mentions that it's a big bucket of nothing, and she's right. And you might say that Swamp Thing started out as a human but is now something inhuman, no longer shackled by the morality of his once human mind, but then why bother coming in to tell Woodrow not to do this then? Not to mention, if Swamp Thing is the representative of the Parliament of Trees, and if everyone on Earth dies, then who is Swamp Thing going to represent the Parliament to? For that matter, not once does this movie reference the scientific nonsense of Ivy and Floronic Man's plan. I'm no scientist, but there's this thing called photosynthesis. I guess the best way to explain it is that mammals like you and me breathe in oxygen, and breathe out carbon dioxide, and plants and presumably plant things like Swamp Thing, Floronic Man, and Poison Ivy breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. It's a symbiosis, if you will. So if all of the oxygen-breathing creatures on Earth are suddenly turned into carbon dioxide-breathing creatures, then everything on the planet would suffocate, yes? Now, Ivy is supposed to be smart enough to figure something like that out. Larry Holmes could have figured that out. So even if Ivy and Floronic Man's plan goes exactly like they want it to, things will still go horribly wrong. But not one character in this movie even considers that. Anyway, then we have 2 minutes of credits and then 4 minutes of Harley Quinn's new job as a television psychiatrist / game show host. Now, any one of these things might not seem like a big deal by themselves, but when you take an hour and 14-minute movie and then take away 23.5 minutes of fluff, this mess has even less of a plot to it than Batman Sub-Zero. Overall, I want to repeat what I said at the beginning of this review. This isn't the worst movie that I've ever seen. There are many movies that are worse. Even narrowing things down to the superhero genre, this isn't even in the top 10 worst movies. But it's also not either good or enjoyable. I cannot think of a single reason that I would ever want to rewatch this movie again, which hurts me to say with how much I really love the DC animated universe. But after 10 years away from the DCAU, this was not the return to this world that I would have wanted. But even with my lukewarm reaction to this movie, if they announced today that they were going to do another movie set in this universe, I would be optimistic. So I guess I can honestly say this didn't squander all of the goodwill the previous 15 years of the DCAU had built up. I guess that's something. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this review, and if you did, I sure hope you'll like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you did like this video, I've done many videos talking about different series of the DCAU, but next week I'll be starting an animated series set in a different universe. I hope you'll join me then, and in the meantime, have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.